Greetings and welcome to my second discussion on how to create a robust lab environment. There's a couple things that I've discovered since the last topic, so I wanted to bring those up, and this should be a pretty brief conversation. So let's have a quick recap of what the environment looks like. I'm running VMware Workstation Pro, and I'm doing some nested hypervisors, VMware and Hyper-V. And in the past, I was relying a little more heavily on the Hyper-V lab. So the way that I tackled doing the switch infrastructure is I would go into VMware Workstation Professional, create a boatload of NICs, then in turn add those to the Vyatta or add those virtual NICs to the Hyper-V host, and then create some interfaces and also create other virtual switches in Hyper-V. So, it worked just fine, but there's a lot of administrative overhead. Now, what I found challenging with that sort of infrastructure was when I switched over to wanting to manage Esxi. And there may have been a way to accomplish what I was doing there, but I'd remembered that in the past as a VMware administrator that VMware can fully support VLAN tagging. So at that point, what I wanted to do was decide if Vyatta could support the VLAN tagging on the back end for the virtual interfaces. And lo and behold, it can. So the idea here is that you have your primary Ethernet, and the primary Ethernet doesn't have a VLAN ID. And then you can create these port groups which are represented by a VLAN ID. So this is VMnet 11. I would want to put the VLAN tag of 11. This is VMnet 9. I'll put the VLAN ID of 9. And I'm going with a simple 192.168.10 dot, 9 dot, 11 dot, and so on. So here is the way that looks, and of course it's got very little administrative overhead because it simply is one NIC and then is represented by virtual port groups within that NIC. So a very clean way to do it, which led me to looking into the virtual interfaces. So on the Vyatta, what this is going to look like from the web UI is that I've got Ethernet 0 here, and then I've got virtual interfaces for Ethernet 0. So here's Ethernet 0.1, and that interface has 192.168.1.1, and essentially, I repeat that for different interfaces, and I've went all the way up to 19. Then as I build this out, if I want the NAT rules set up, I would set those up as if they were physical interfaces. So I just simply put the source 192.168.11.0, and I choose the type of masquerade, and the outbound interface is Ethernet 0. So it's really not much different than the way I'd set the router up in the past. However, I don't have the administrative overhead on the actual host servers. So really and truly, it's 50% faster, if not more. So let's go ahead and switch back to the full view of Hyper-V host 1. So, we've kind of discussed how you would set this up in VMware. And, it's a clean, easy interface. You can see all the VMs that are associated with that virtual machine port group. Then I decided that I wanted to take this approach with my Hyper-V host as well. And the Hyper-V host is a little different. In fact, I find it to be a little cleaner. So what I did with the Hyper-V host is I have two virtual NICs, VMnet 1 and also what I'm calling now the vSwitch trunk. And both of these virtual NICs have access to my physical Ethernet router. And the first one is IP'd, as you would expect. Just standard. Well, actually, it's obtaining the IP automatically right now from my Motorola router. But the important part is if we switch into the virtual switch manager is I've got a single NIC I'm calling it virtual networks. I'm not allowing Windows to manage this whatsoever. And that's where it looks a lot cleaner than before. And all I have to do is simply choose a virtual network, enable virtual LAN identification, and just put the VLAN tag there. So this is just really exciting to me. And the other piece to this is that it really mirrors what a professional corporate environment would do anyways. So you'll notice when you go to Vyatta.com, it has now moved. Brocade purchased the Vyatta virtual router. So unfortunately, you may have to go to Brocade to download a demo, but the good news about Brocade purchasing that product is if you learn to use this in your lab environment, or if you happen to have the older Vyatta, this really could map to a skill set that that could profit you going forward. If Brocade chose to buy this virtual router, odds are they can monetize it, and there might be a shop that you run into at some point that would look at your experience with that Brocade / Vyatta router as being a positive. So in closing, I hope you find this demonstration to be useful, and I encourage you to create some rich lab environments